The palace walls have remained quiet for such a duration that numerous people thought they would never utter a sound once more. However, presently, following months of murmurs, rejections, and meticulously constructed declarations, a surprising proclamation has shattered that stillness. Dispatches originating from within the regal grounds imply that Meghan's destiny inside the institution has shifted in a disastrous direction, much more dire than anybody had foreseen. Therefore, what could conceivably be occurring regarding Meghan? Accompany us as we reveal the stunning disclosure from the royal residence concerning Meghan's destiny. During the beginning of November, King Charles had been enduring mounting strain, and the household continued distributing merely small fragments of intelligence to the populace. Concealed behind shut entryways, high-ranking assistants silently reorganized his itinerary, eliminating anything that could contribute baseless anxiety. This implied Prince William was required to shoulder even greater accountability. Although he was already balancing formal obligations, domestic existence, and the escalating friction inside the regal framework. Initially, William assumed everything was merely a fleeting tempest. He trusted that, similar to numerous occasions previously, the tranquility of the cold season would ultimately chill the disputes and resolve the turmoil. However, on this occasion, matters seemed distinct. Over various months, a sequence had been developing, faint initially but turning more distinct with each elapsing week. Within the United States, major press organizations started disseminating theatrical tales asserting that Meghan was getting ready to regain her former position and remodel herself for a fresh age in the public view. Simultaneously, British pundits became increasingly annoyed, labeling the persistent Sussex news cycles as ceaseless theatrics that continued eclipsing the Crown's labor. The vast chasm between what American and British press were articulating produced a peculiar vacant void in the narrative, a quietness that Meghan's squad appeared more than prepared to occupy. Within Kensington Palace, William accepted numerous confidential updates that highlighted something profoundly disturbing. Unnamed informants, individuals nobody could name, were unexpectedly supplying U.S. chat programs and internet sites with new anecdotes concerning Catherine, the royal kin, and Meghan's past grievances. Numerous of these assertions were amplified, and several were entirely fabricated. Yet all of them were distributed at the ideal moment to disrupt significant royal occasions. It was a trend nobody could overlook any longer. Subsequently, the administration intervened. By late November, the Foreign Office silently cautioned the residents that this revived transoceanic theatrics was rendering diplomatic dialogues more difficult. A high-ranking official dispatched a personal note stating the household required to maintain its correspondence unified and regulated. The note was courteous on the exterior, yet the significance was cutting and immediate. The Crown was obliged to reclaim the storyline before it commenced impacting global connections. Amidst all this, two ladies within the monarchy observed occurrences develop with escalating worry. Princess Anne, who trusted profoundly in strictness and structure, viewed the disorder as something that conflicted with everything she had devoted her existence toward. Queen Camilla, conversely, dreaded the continuing upheaval might debilitate King Charles, particularly presently when he was already susceptible. Ultimately, both ladies, although for very diverse motives, concurred on one matter: William was required to intervene. By the concluding week of November, the strain surrounding the residence had grown nearly impossible to disregard. Personnel sensed it, counselors sensed it. Even Catherine, who was typically stable and soothing, felt it pushing inward, and as the cold season approached, William comprehended one agonizing reality: remaining mute would no longer shield his kin or the institution. The initial distinct signal that matters had traversed into hazardous ground did not originate from a periodical banner or an internet breach. It appeared during a late-night meeting Princess Anne joined within Frogmore Library, a chamber typically kept for the most delicate papers. That evening, the chamber was frigid, filled with a winter nipping that appeared to seep into the partitions and render every term heavier than normal. Anne, who had been disciplined her whole existence to observe even the tiniest alterations within the regal sphere, meticulously examined a pile of dossiers distributed across the desk. At the summit was a synopsis generated by the Royal Communications Monitoring Unit. It detailed an expanding trend observed across numerous US-centered media locations. Collectively, these publishers were utilizing synchronized discussion topics that insinuated Meghan was readying a massive humanitarian return. The dossiers displayed faint intimations that the royal clan was unjustly restraining her. Not in the dossiers pointed explicitly to Meghan herself, but the flair, mood, and approach felt nearly indistinguishable from her prior media maneuvers. Anne did not leap to deductions, she never did. Yet she recognized what it resembled when somebody was molding a storyline. The subsequent indication arrived the following dawn. William accepted a classified electronic bundle via the residence's protected grid. Within were screen captures, time markers, and thorough breakdowns demonstrating that numerous American audio programs and late-night broadcasts had commenced alluding to informants inside Buckingham Palace. Informants that did not genuinely exist. Certain assertions were benign, but others insinuated friction between Catherine and high-ranking personnel. One program even hinted that Catherine was liable for an interior dispute and that William was covertly annoyed with her. William gazed at the display for a lengthy instant after perusing everything. His fingers clenched slightly around the device, though his visage stayed serene and collected. Exterior to his workplace, a worker murmured softly. He will not articulate it aloud. But this is the initial occasion I have witnessed him appear genuinely exhausted. Subsequently arrived the Winter Update dossier. Thus, what does the dossier hold? Let us discover the covert paper. The instant that neither William nor Anne could sweep away commenced like a minute flicker. Hushed, nearly unseen, yet potent enough to ignite everything. It materialized from nowhere, transported covertly to a mid-tier assistant who comprehended immediately that this was not merely another file. It bore significance, it bore peril. Inside the envelope was a comprehensive scheme for a year-end press crusade that aspired to entirely remodel how the Globe viewed Meghan's tenure in the royal lineage. The paper depicted Meghan as a misconstrued, progressive lady whose endeavors to update regal customs were obstructed at every bend by an antiquated, rigid apparatus. It was composed in a sleek, refined American public relations dialect, replete with assurance and tactics. There were frameworks for massive television dialogues, opinion articles in significant broadsheets, and even a proposal for a distinct documentary to be unveiled by the close of the year. However, for William, the issue was not the communication. It was the scheduling. The crusade was slated to deploy during Christmas week, a duration that signified more to the monarchy than any other span of the year. It is the solitary season when custom becomes nearly holy, and any suggestion of scandal feels like a direct strike to the crown itself. Anne perused the paper later that identical afternoon. She progressed through the leaves rapidly at first, her keen vision grasping every particular. But when she arrived at the final segment, she halted abruptly. That portion discussed tactical chances to tackle deficiencies in royal philanthropic initiatives. Anne perceived instantly what the author had attempted to conceal amidst courteous terms. This was not a proposal, it was a silent indictment. And the objective was Catherine. Anne was savagely faithful to Catherine, nearly defensive in a maternal manner. Witnessing Catherine silently faulted in a glossy American media submission made something solidify within her. Her visage remained collected, but her spirit plummeted into a chillier space. That dusk, she convened with William privately in the extended, obscure hallway of Windsor, the one where the ancient heaters never fully banish the winter frost. Their strides reverberated gently as they strolled abreast, their tones hushed. Anne elucidated the circumstance bit by bit, how the crusade would strike the journalism sector, how the populace would react, and how Catherine's standing, constructed through years of consistent labor and elegance, would likely be the initial item forfeited. William hearkened without uttering a word, his mandible clenched, yet his countenance never fractured. When Anne eventually concluded, he exhaled a sluggish respiration through his nose, the frigid atmosphere rendering it slightly discernible. "Who else is aware?" he inquired. "Camilla," Anne responded. "She examined it this afternoon." William ceased strolling. Camilla's participation altered everything. For numerous years, she had been a divisive persona in the public view. But lately, she had evolved into one of the sturdiest guardians of King Charles's tranquility of spirit. She comprehended disorder. She comprehended public tempests. She had survived the direst of them. If even she was anxious, then this was no minor matter. This was a genuine menace. Later that evening, within the silent vestibules of Clarence House, Camilla approached William solo. Her tone was serene but bore the weary fortitude of someone who had battled too many media conflicts. "It is commencing again," she stated. "Distinct visages, identical maneuvers, and your sire cannot endure another interval like this." It was the initial occasion Camilla publicly aligned with William in anything concerning Meghan. That instant informed William that the predicament was deeper, weightier, and more perilous than anyone desired to concede. The concluding caution arrived unforeseenly from the Foreign Office. They dispatched William a coded dispatch explaining that escalating American press narratives were starting to impact diplomatic discussions. The terms were cautious, tactful, but the reality was lucid. The royal family's domestic friction was now overflowing into international governance. By the time the conclusion of November neared, the signals were no longer faint murmurs. They were blaring, vivid, and impossible to disregard. William, the prospective monarch, the offspring of a fearful sovereign, and the spouse of a lady now being pulled reluctantly into a tempest, realized one matter with agonizing lucidity: staying mute would only render everything worse. A resolution had to be determined. So, could this result in a kin showdown? Let us discover the royal family confrontation. The compression that had been silently mounting all through November finally ruptured open inside the 1844 room of Buckingham Palace. A chamber drenched in hundreds of years of chronicles. A location where premiers, monarchs, and foreign commanders had once murmured about conflicts, armistices, and fragile political accords. Yet even with all that past, the chamber had seldom witnessed a juncture like this. A domestic standoff that felt weightier than any prior arbitration. Outdoors, the winter gale shoved forcefully against the lofty ancient casements, making the frames vibrate in a sluggish, consistent rhythm, nearly like a caution. Indoors, the chill felt keener, as if the partitions themselves were steeling for what was approaching. William sat at the helm of the elongated, burnished desk. A dense pile of papers lay before him. Hard copies from the Royal Communications Monitoring Unit, records from late-night U.S. chat programs, briefs from consultants, and worst of all, the winter update packet that itemized Meghan's projected year-end media launch. To his left, Princess Anne sat with her limbs crossed, her look serene but rigid. On his right, Queen Camilla rested her gripped palms on the desk, her visage fixed with a gravity that even the most senior personnel were astonished to witness. When the confidential clerk shut the portals, William spoke initially. "Before we proceed," he stated, his tone stable but icy, "I want it comprehended that everything uttered in this chamber regards the firmness of the crown. Not private sentiments, not ancient scars. Nobody disputed. Everyone realized the plight had floated far past individual frictions." Anne glided her marked-up duplicate of the winter update toward him. "This," she said acutely, her tone as brittle as the rime outdoors, "is a synchronized endeavor to redraft the tale. A narrative that portrays us as the issue. It sabotages the monarchy. And more crucially, it aims at Catherine." Camilla dipped her head, her pitch deep and restrained. "Your sire cannot undergo another period of disorder. He has only just discovered some steadiness following the previous surge. If this crusade emerges at Christmas, he will be the primary one to ache." William thumbed through the papers once more, not because he required reading them, but because he necessitated a few seconds to balance himself under the burden of what was transpiring. For weeks, he had felt this emergency mounting, slipping further beyond command. However, hearing Anne and Camilla, two individuals so dissimilar in disposition, speak with total harmony gave him a lucidity he hadn't fully seized until now. The confidential clerk commenced reciting from the correspondence logs. The chamber grew entirely mute. "Numerous American media publishers," he stated, "accepted identical talking points from 3 profiles linked to a PR firm that previously collaborated with the Duchess." Anne's gaze tightened. William did not shift, but his shoulders stiffened. "There are also oblique assaults against the Princess of Wales," the clerk continued, "assertions of interior strife, emotional fragility, and even suggestions of charity mishandling. None of these indictments are backed by any proof. Yet the design is intentional. Camilla breathed out acutely. This is rash, not just for Catherine, for the whole establishment. And then arrived the phrase that made the chamber feel even chillier. If fully inaugurated, this media loop is forecasted to monopolize public discourse throughout the festive season, eclipsing royal obligations and diminishing public trust. Those final terms, diminishing public trust, bore a gravity every royal in the chamber comprehended instantly. As the consultants went further into the minutiae, the image became even more frightening. Foreign administrations had silently started inquiring whether the Crown intended to tackle the expanding volatility linked to the Sussexes. It was exactly the sort of international humiliation the household had aspired to evade. When the consultants concluded, Anne leaned ahead, her pitch resolute. "William, you realize what must occur. If Meghan is readying a press offensive that aims at your spouse, menaces the solidarity of the monarchy, and imperils your father's well-being, you cannot permit it to persist." William looked downward at the sheets. But he was not perusing them anymore. The solution had already lodged deep within him. The monarchy simply could not survive another worldwide Sussex gale. Not with the king's vitality unsure. Not with diplomacy already stretched. And not while the Institute was attempting to update under fierce public inspection. Then Camilla spoke, her voice uncommonly tender, denuded of any ceremonial detachment. "You bear the destiny of this kin," she said gently. "If you must sketch a rigid boundary, sketch it. Charles will comprehend, even if it pains him." It was the initial occasion she had blatantly emboldened him to take potent measures. Nobody spoke after that. Outdoors, the breeze wailed softly along the archaic rock partitions of the palace. William finally lifted his head. "I will act," he said, "but this time it must be conclusive. No partial measures, no bewilderment." Instantly, the personnel started outlining probable declarations. William read each one meticulously. He dismissed anything that felt acrimonious or melodramatic. He did not desire theatrics, he desired lucidity. A pristine, potent dispatch that left no space for misreading. By late dusk, the ultimate iteration was nearly completed. The strategy was uncomplicated. At 6:47 a.m. on November 30th, Kensington Palace would circulate a public affirmation validating William's stance regarding Meghan, ceasing the months of indecision that had eroded the family and rattled the establishment. As the staff quietly exited the 1844 room, William stayed there solitary, the obscure illuminations casting elongated silhouettes across the deck. He realized that within hours, periodicals from London to Los Angeles would shred apart every term he had sanctioned. He realized the response would be boisterous, emotive, and unyielding. What did the household divulge? Let us discover the shocking announcement. In the silence of winter at the residence, the verdict was already reached. All that remained was to broadcast it. November 30th arrived with a frail tranquility, the sort that hangs in the ether just before something fractures. Rhyme adhered to the rock columns outside Kensington Palace, slender and breakable like glazing. Inside, behind the hefty drapes of his private library, Prince William stood solitary, reading the concluding version of the notification he had expended 12 hours refining. The resolution had been taken the night prior in the 1844 room. But its full burden only struck him now. In the pre-dawn silence, William sensed the vastness of what he was about to perform. Publicly sketch the firmest boundary the monarchy had taken against Meghan since the Sussex exit in 2020. And do it not in fury, but with keen, unbending sharpness. At 6:30 a.m., Princess Anne showed up. She did not inquire if William was certain. She did not need to. One glance at his visage told her everything. Placing her palm on his limb, a scarce signal from someone typically so restrained, she said, "It is time." It was almost like authorization, though William did not require it. At 6:42 a.m., Queen Camilla entered silently, swathed in a gloomy winter cloak. Her arrival was unforeseen. She had already voiced backing the night prior, but came to ensure William realized she stood with him in this concluding instant. Not for governance or tactics, but because she trusted that terminating this loop of public upheaval was requisite for Charles's welfare. William dipped his head in gratitude but kept his eyes on the declaration in his hands. He had rephrased it repeatedly, removing all sentiment until only the vital verity stayed. This was not chastisement, not a rebuke, it was a rigid final limit, necessary and inescapable. At 6:47 a.m., the dispatch went live. It was brief, but its significance was colossal, following a thorough appraisal of continuing challenges and recent public storylines. The Prince of Wales has concluded that there will be no future harmonization or interaction with the Duchess of Sussex. This verdict, though arduous, mirrors the necessity to shield the firmness and duties of the Crown. No inflations, no indictments, no space for misapprehension. Within a minute, BBC, Sky News, and ITV disrupted their morning schedules. CNN and CBS cut from late-night reporting to a breaking news streamer. Prince William draws tragic final line on Meghan. The response was instant and global. In London, the quietness outside Kensington Palace shifted into mutterings as travelers paused, stunned. Many had anticipated a clarification regarding recent media bewilderment. But not this, not a total severance, not a declaration delivered with the distinct firmness of the institution. In Edinburgh, a BBC analyst termed it the most conclusive internal limit set by a prospective king since the Diana epoch. On social media, retired royal reporters noted the lack of one key phrase, and that exclusion alone spoke volumes. The portal was shut forever. Across the Atlantic, American pundits reacted with a blend of jolt and intrigue. Roundtables on MSNBC argued whether this was William finally asserting sway or the monarchy responding to strains it could no longer govern. On CBS, an emotive host reflected on the early days of Harry and Meghan's wedlock and asked how a tale that began with such aspiration had concluded so bleakly. Within Clarence House, King Charles learned of the notification from his confidential clerk, though he had known the resolution was coming. Seeing it made public brought quiet grief. Still, he comprehended. He had instructed William that a prospective sovereign must sometimes place the crown above private ease. So, what is the consequence of the proclamation? Let us take a nearer look at the royal recalibration aftermath. In the hours following the 6:47 a.m. declaration, the royal kin entered a cautious, gauged state of adaptation, a sluggish, intentional realignment that only occurs when a verdict carries repercussions for years to come. The declaration itself had been succinct, exact, and diligently constructed, yet its impacts radiated far beyond the residence walls. Every term had been selected to signal rigidity without theatrics, to transmit sway without ire. But inside, those who lived and labored alongside the royals realized that no notification, no matter how regulated, could be constrained entirely. The undulations would be sensed in every nook of the monarchy. At Kensington Palace, senior personnel moved with silent haste. By 8:15 a.m., just over an hour after the statement, a roundtable gathering was underway. Consultants from communications, legal, and protocol divisions assembled around the burnished desk, papers neatly piled, laptops buzzing gently. Their assignment was clear: stabilize the domicile, modify internal logs, amend briefing supplies for foreign bureaus, and ensure a single consistent storyline reached both the populace and international associates. It was labor that necessitated exactness, prudence, and the sort of serene focus that can only come from practice. No one in the chamber appeared stunned. The strain had been building for weeks, a sluggish crescendo that everyone had felt. Now, with the limit clearly sketched, there was a sense of wary alleviation. One assistant whispered to another, "At least now we realize exactly where we stand." The plainness of the remark belied the fact that decisions of this magnitude did not just resolve internal quarrels. They remodeled the cadences of palace existence and echoed through hallways of influence around the globe. The most immediate and observable shift transpired at the Foreign Office. By mid-morning, envoys had been briefed. All queries from international associates about Meghan were to be steered to a single standardized reply. The dispatch was short, almost clinical. The issue is concluded. It was devised to halt conjecture, especially from American media grids that had expended months framing the tale as an emotive saga ripe for sensationalism. The UK administration, keenly aware of fragile transatlantic ties, understood the import of the clarification even more than the populace could conceive. Princess Anne, meanwhile, resumed her public obligations with a revived sense of intent. Watchers noted her rigid stance, the steadfast stability in her stare, the sort of composure that spoke of both practice and silent sway. In recent years, Anne had endured critique for her strict fidelity to protocol, for taking stances that sometimes seemed severe to outsiders. Yet today, she carried herself as someone who had predicted the tempest long before it arrived and who had quietly shoved the family to confront it before it spiraled out of control. Every stride she took, every nod she gave reflected a woman balancing custom with prescience, duty with determination. Queen Camilla spent the afternoon in private contemplation. Winter radiance streamed through the tall casements of her lounge in slender icy shafts, casting long silhouettes that stretched across the rug. She had opted to back William in part for Charles's sake, but the burden of that resolution lingered. Having once experienced the upheaval of public inspection, she acknowledged the familiar designs, the faint shifts in coalitions, the silent accumulation of strain, the unavoidable public assessment. Cognizance came at a price, a persistent reminder that history has a savage way of reiterating itself. As for King Charles, he attended a short morning briefing at Clarence House before withdrawing to his library. Personnel noted that he appeared both exhausted and collected, a man quietly processing the repercussions of a verdict he had sanctioned in private. He understood its necessity, yet the personal toll was genuine. But how did the populace reply to the proclamation? Let us discover the public reaction. Public response to the declaration was sharply split, following designs that had long been recognizable. In the United Kingdom, particularly among those over the age of 50, the maneuver was largely embraced. Calls to BBC Wireless reflected a sense that the monarchy had been far too tolerant, too obliging for too long. Stability, pundits insisted, must precede sentiment. Across the Atlantic, however, the tale unfolded differently. In the United States, morning chat programs dissected William's deeds with zeal. Some panelists termed the resolution courageous. Others queried whether it shut the portal on rapprochement too soon. Yet amid the dispute, one point emerged almost universally: Catherine's serene, collected dignity had become an emblem of firmness in an age otherwise dominated by relentless din and public inspection. By nightfall, the crown had assumed a new form, quieter, more focused, more intentional. The notification did more than cease conjecture. It redefined the limits of the royal family itself, signaling both sway and constraint. As the winter sun slipped behind London's rooftops on November 30th, the residence grounds were bathed in a reflective quietude. The atmosphere was crisp, carrying the faint aroma of rime, and the lanterns glowed softly against the chill, casting long, intentional silhouettes across the stone walkways. For the first time in many months, the monarchy seemed to stand on firmer terrain, anchored by lucidity and the somber understanding of its own frailty. The day's occurrences served as both a respite and a caution. Even the mightiest families, it seemed, could splinter when unresolved strains festered too long. For many watchers, the scene holds a haunting familiarity: the careful declarations, the quiet staff gatherings, the measured public showings, the delicate administration of global perception, all echoed a history that refused to be forgotten. So, what do you think about the shocking validation from the royal palace about Meghan? Share your notions with us in the comments section. Do not forget to like and subscribe.